Hey, welcome and good evening. I will now call the February 16th special meeting of the Lane Community College Board of Education to order. In order to continue conducting meetings in a manner that will help to combat the spread of COVID-19 and promote the safety and well-being of our community, this meeting is being held remotely. I'd like to remind board members and staff to keep themselves muted and to use the raise hand feature when you would like to speak. Please do not use the chat. That's reserved for tech communication. Board members are also asked to have their video turned on so you're visible to the viewing public. Donna, could you please take the roll?
Sure. Holly Johnson.
Present.
Angela Van Kraus.
Present.
Mike Eister.
Here.
Austin Polneggy.
Here.
Steve Mattel.
Here.
Rosie Pryor.
Here.
Lisa Fragola.
Here. Thank you. So everyone is present this evening. And we will start our meeting with acknowledgement of homeland or land recognition. And tonight, Associate Vice President of Student Affairs, Mindy Du, is going to do that for us. Welcome, Mindy.
Thank you, Chair Fragola. We begin our meeting with the acknowledgement that the land we are on is the traditional homelands of the Kalapuya people. The Kalapuya were stewards of this very land for over 14,000 years before their traditional way of life was forever disrupted and destroyed. We start our meeting with humility and reverence for the original inhabitants, the Kalapuya. I have also been asked to give a brief reflection. And as a white person, I always take the opportunity to think of the lens that I use to view the world. And my lenses are often informed by literature and academic articles. And so I thought I would offer a book review for you as a former English teacher. This is An Indigenous Peoples History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. And it's important that she is a noted historian, that she is a Native American activist from the 1970s. She's a fellow Oklahoman, and as I've spent quite some time in Oklahoma, and I thought that I would just share a brief passage for you that helps to inform my own reading. Writing U.S. history from an Indigenous people's perspective requires rethinking the consensual national narrative. That narrative is wrong or deficient, not in its facts, dates, or details, but rather in its very essence. Inherent in the myth, we've been taught as an embrace of settler colonialism and genocide. The myth persists, not for lack of free speech or poverty of information, but rather for an absence of motivation to ask questions that challenge the core of the scripted narrative of the origin story. How might acknowledging the reality of US history work to transform society? That is the central question this book pursues. So I'm not finished with this book, and I think it's also not finished with me. Thank you for the opportunity.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm in the middle of that book also and highly, highly recommend it. So let's go ahead and without objection, I'd like to adopt the agenda with flexibility. Is there any objection to adopting the agenda with flexibility? Okay, seeing none, we've adopted the agenda with flexibility. So this evening, our first action item for this special meeting is budget committee appointments. And I'm wondering if one of our board members from Zone 2 or Zone 5 would like to start us off with a motion around the recommendations. And then either of you can speak to your recommendations.
I move that we approve Siobhan Kinsell as Zone 2 Budget Committee appointee. And do I move for both or just my?
The recommendation is for both, yeah, but you'll both be able to speak to your appointments.
And Susan Fahey for Zone 5 Budget Committee.
Great. Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you. So moved by Angela and seconded by Holly. Angela, did you want to start us off speaking to your appointment?
Sure. And I think that we've offered some time for appointees to have a moment to introduce themselves. So I look forward to that. I've had an opportunity to chat with Siobhan, and I'm just really excited to reappoint her. She was serving for Zone 5 and now will be serving for Zone 2 for the full 3-year term. She is a dedicated public servant. She has incredible critical thinking skills, and I think she's going to be just an incredible asset to our budget committee. And I'm super excited. So thank you for applying.
Steve, did you want to speak to your recommendation?
Well, sure. I'm also really excited to introduce Sue Fahey. She'll have a moment in just a moment to introduce herself. And I know she submitted a letter. You've all had a chance to read it, so I don't want to reiterate or repeat too much of it. But as the letter says, she's got a long history in this community, has family members and herself attended LCC, and of course has significant financial experience, which I'll let her speak to directly. But I think she'll make a really wonderful addition to our budget committee.
Great, thank you. And are there any other questions or comments from the board? Okay, so we are going to make a decision on the motion first. That was the guidance that I had gotten from staff, and then we will have an opportunity for Siobhan and for Susan to introduce themselves. So if there's no further discussion, Donna, could you please call the roll on the motion? We have a motion to approve both Siobhan Consell and Susan Fahey to the Budget Committee.
Holly Johnson,
Aye.
Angela Van Kraus,
Aye.
Mike Eister,
Aye.
Austin Polnaghy,
Aye.
Steve Mattel,
Aye.
Rosie Pryor,
Enthusiastic aye.
Lisa Fragala.
Aye. So that motion carries unanimously. Welcome to our two new Budget Committee members. Siobhan, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, I would. First of all, thank you. I'm so excited. My name is Siobhan Cancel, and some of you may know me. I was getting to serve a little bit last year, and I feel like I just got my feet wet, and then I was like, oh no, it might go away. So I really appreciate this opportunity. And Angela, thank you so much for reaching out. Without you, this would not have been possible. Just so give a little bit of background. I have been in Eugene since 1992. LCC has always been near and dear to my heart. I'm really excited for this opportunity because I feel like a lot of people don't quite know what goes on in budgets. And when you don't know what goes on, sometimes you tend to fill in the blanks. And so I'm really hoping to be a better informed community member so I can help inform other community members. And I think being a woman of color, I can speak to voices that aren't often heard. So again, thank you so much for this opportunity, and I can't wait to get started.
Great, thank you. Hey, Susan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, good evening. I too am very excited to join the LCC Budget Committee. Thank you for your vote of confidence. As my materials mentioned, I've been in the community for a long time and been a public servant for over 30 years now. 20 was at 4J School District in the finance department, the last several as their CFO, and then I moved over to eWeb and spent a few years there as their CFO and assistant general manager. And I just think community colleges have such an awesome opportunity and responsibility to create a vibrant community. As Steve mentioned, all my kids went through LCC. I've attended LCC. It's an incredible institution that serves our public well, and I hope to be able to serve both LCC and our community on the budget committee. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. It's really important that we have enthusiastic community members, and so we're excited for the both of you to join us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Feel free to stick around if you'd like, though, you know, we won't expect you to spend your entire evening with us. I'm going to move us on to our next action item for the special meeting. Some of you may have received information. I know you did in the packet, but you might also be seeing some things coming through OCCA about Future Ready Oregon 2022. It's a $200 million investment in the state's workforce system to utilize existing infrastructure. So things already ready in place to expedite short-term solutions. And it specifically is intended to address inequities in the workforce system. Of that money, a lot of it's going to expand existing programs, and quite a good bit of it will hopefully be coming to community colleges. So I did have the opportunity to, I provided public testimony at a committee meeting that occurred this last week, and also spoke with some of our state representatives, Floyd Przonski, also Marty Wilde and Paul Holvey. And we have a resolution that's going through the Senate right now that is number, I'm sorry, I'm going to get the number wrong. Oh, SB 1545. And so we are being encouraged by OCCA to lend our voices as community colleges in support of SB 1545. And we have a resolution to lend our support as a board. And I also know Brett has some more information for us regarding this. Brett, did you want to share anything else?
Hi, good evening. Thank you, Chair Fragala, and good evening, board members. President Hamilton, you did a great job of basically laying out kind of the basics of the bill, Chair Fragala. The legislation was moved out of committee on Monday with a due pass recommendation and sent to Ways and Means. So kind of expect that it will be parked there until we get closer to the end of the legislative session. It sounds right now like there is support to pass the bill. If there are any kind of issues or hangups, it's questions over funding levels for some of the other projects in the bill. I haven't heard of any real concerns about the credit for prior learning or the pathways investments that are proposed in the bill. So there is, as was mentioned on OCCA's website, if you would like to do something on your own, there's a voter voice portal on the OCCA website, occa17.com, that allows you as individuals to contact your legislators and send a message of support for this legislation. And if the board approves this resolution tonight, I'll make sure that it's shared with all of the Lane County legislators as well as the Ways and Means Committee members.
Great, thanks, Brett. So how about we go ahead and get a motion on the table before we move on to any further conversation or questions?
Move approval.
I second.
Great. So moved by Rosie, seconded by Austin. Thank you both. Any questions or comments from board members?
I have just one observation to make, which is a complete departure from what we're discussing. But I think everyone present should know that our board chair is sharing her very special birthday with us this evening, and we should thank her for sharing that personal time with us.
Thank you very much, Rosie. Oh, I guess I could say I wouldn't rather be anywhere else, but there might be places I would rather be. So, but I do enjoy the honor of serving the college. So, so not seeing any questions or oh, go ahead, Austin.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out to the board that obviously a big focus is around workforce development and serving underserved communities. When I was in DC, speaking with our students that we had that presented to our Congress people and to our senators and other in the bills that we were pushing for, focus a lot on workforce development and on serving underserved communities. So as we start approving programs and looking at our programs and so forth, workforce development is going to be a big part of what legislators and government is looking for with funding community colleges and higher education. Thank you.
Austin. Any other questions or comments from board members? Okay, Donna, can you call the roll, please?
Okay, Holly Johnson,
Aye.
Angela Van Kraus,
Aye.
Mike Eister,
Aye.
Austin Folneggy,
Aye.
Steve Mattel,
Aye.
Rosie Pryor,
Aye.
Lisa Fragala.
Aye, so that motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay, so that is our last action item in our special meeting this evening. I am going to close the February 16th special meeting of the LCC Board of Education. And I will now call the February 16th work session of Lane Community College Board of Education meeting to order. Please let the record reflect that the roll was called during the special meeting and that all board members are present for our work session. So without objection, I'd like to adopt the work session agenda with flexibility. Is there any objection to adopting the agenda with flexibility? Okay, seeing none, we've adopted the agenda with flexibility. And since we do have flexibility in our agenda, I have a point of personal privilege from Dr. Hamilton. Dr. Hamilton?
Thank you, Chair Fragala. It gives me great pleasure to announce we have a new vice president for finance and operations. We've been without one for a very long time. So I'm thrilled to introduce Dr. George Steyer, coming to us from Broward College in South Florida today. At Broward, he served as the campus chief business and finance officer and as the dean of business services on the Broward's North Campus, which is a very large school. Those of you that are familiar with Broward, serving over 12,000 students at his campus. He brings over 10 years of facilities management, which there's going to be a lot of here at Lane, budget management, contract administration, finance, and even employee relations. Dr. Steyer earned his doctorate at Nova Southeastern University and is a retired veteran with the Army Reserve Career Division, Region 5. Dr. Steyer, welcome. And would you like to say a few words?
Thank you very much for that warm welcome. And all I'm going to say is a pleasure joining the Lane Community College family. And I hope to see you in the very near future, face to face. So we can have, I don't drink coffee, so I'm going to say hot tea.
Thank you.
Great, welcome very much, Dr. Steyer. We're excited to have you on board with us. And we are all hoping that we get to meet in person sometime. So let's go ahead and move on to our first discussion item for the evening. We have some information and discussion on PERS bond sales, and Greg Holmes, our controller, is going to kick that off for us, but I believe we also have a guest from Piper Sandler.
We do. Happy birthday, Madam Chair, Board of Education, and Dr. Hamilton and Dr. Steyer. Looking forward to Friday. So we're talking PERS, right? So this is pension, and right now, as we talked at the board meeting, bond rates are pretty low right now, right? So now's the time to start thinking about issuing PERS bonds to pay our unfunded liability. And so the college engaged with about 10 other districts on a study that's the first step to selling PERS bonds. And that was Econ Northwest. It's a very heavy statistics review. On January 12th, it was a 90-minute presentation. Question and answers is going over there that Zach and I attended. I'm happy to announce that we have Carol Samuels from Piper Sandler joining us today. She has 20 years of experience in Oregon with 157 different municipalities, selling $7.2 billion in just PERS pension bonds alone. And so Carol has been connected with the college since 1995 in all our bond offerings. And so for some of those that have attended Oregon School Bond Associations and others, you'll see Carol and their representatives there doing a presentation. So Carol has a unique skill set in working with boards and explaining very difficult topics. And I'm happy to welcome Carol.
Welcome, Carol.
Thank you. And
And
thank
I
you. for
believe
that.
we're going to give control to Carol on the panel screen so she can present.
Yeah. So thank you for that nice introduction, Greg. Happy birthday to the chair. And if I mess up anything on PERS, I'm going to call on Sue Fahey, who knows almost as much about it as I do. So nice to see her face as well. I'm going to attempt to share my screen and put it in slideshow. If someone can give me a thumbs up that you can see the big screen, great. So I know you have a really full agenda, so I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but it is kind of a complicated subject. And if you're left with questions, first of all, if you have questions as I go through, don't hesitate to interrupt me. If you have questions afterwards, Greg knows where to find me, so feel free to pursue that. But let's talk about the concept generally. So what are pension bonds? Well, basically the idea is pretty straightforward despite all the external noise. The idea is that you go out and borrow in the market, you take the funds, you send them to PERS, which has a massive shortfall of its own, a portion of which is allocated to Lane Community College. The concept is if your borrowing rate is less than what PERS can earn on its investments, that profit can be used to reduce your payroll costs associated with PERS. Under federal tax law, unlike other borrowings you have done in the past, this cannot be done on a tax exempt basis. So you're already starting with a little bit of a disadvantage relative to where you would ordinarily borrow. But we are still projecting borrowing rates of 3.5%. I will say when I gave this presentation to the group that Greg was referring to, we were way under 3.5%. As of today, we're right at 3.5%. I suspect many of you have noticed that interest rates have risen. So, however, all of the analysis we've been running throughout has been at 3.5%, so we're still in a comfortable place. When the funds are deposited at PERS, they are deposited in what's called a side account, which is like a savings account for Lane Community College. So it is not shared with any other jurisdiction that participates in PERS. And the funds that are deposited in there are not just invested with the rest of the PERS fund, but they are drawn down over a 20-year period and used as an annual credit against what your payroll rates might be. As Greg mentioned, there is good history at issuance of pension bonds, including by the community college itself, who issued in 2003. And the rates have ranged from a low of 2.5% roughly last summer to a high of over 7%. I would not do a pension bond at 7% today. I wouldn't even do it at 5%. But at 3.5% or potentially 4.5%, there may be reason to consider it. So we'll talk about that. The good news for my anxiety level is that most of the jurisdictions I've worked with over the past 20 years have done really, really well, including LCC. However, that's not universally the case, and that's why I'm pretty humble about all of this, because there is risk, and it's really important that you understand what that risk is. So, is now a good time to borrow? Well, it's not as good as it was last summer when we worked with a group of folks who borrowed at under 2.5%. But despite the increase, and you can see this is the 30-year trajectory, which is interest rates are still quite low. Yes, they've been going up, but they're still from historic norms quite low. And when you borrowed in 2003, you were up here. So what else might you consider in evaluating this? Well, the borrowing rate is one side, the investment rate is the other. How has PERS done historically? In fact, quite strong. If you look at the last 50 years, they've earned over 10% on their funds. That's comforting, but perhaps more relevant to those of us who remember 2008 is this statistic here, which is the average return on side accounts between 2004 and 2015. Unfortunately, this data point has not been updated since 2015, but the number would likely be higher than this 8%. And the reason I take comfort from it is this includes the fact that PERS lost 27% in 2008. So despite that, their rate of return has been on average quite strong. And I'm sure you recognize that last year was a killer year. This year, not so much, but last year, the fund earned over 20%. Note that their model assumption is that they will earn 6.9% over a 20-year span. However, in my finance class eons ago, and if any of you took finance classes, I'm sure you heard a variant on this theme, which is history is absolutely no predictor of future performance. So under Oregon law, recognizing that, you are required before you're allowed to go through a pension bond to retain a third-party firm. In this case, you worked with Echo Northwest to prepare a statistically based assessment of the likelihood of investment returns exceeding the interest cost. What Echo Northwest did was what's calling a spade, a Monte Carlo simulation, because we are talking about a bet here that went through 15,000 iterations based upon the current PERS portfolio to determine a probability of success. And here's what they determined. The headline, probability that NPV, which stands for net present value, is more than 0. What does that mean in English? It means what's the probability that you're going to make money on this bet rather than lose money. At 3 different interest rates, in my world, interest rate is expressed as what's called the true interest cost, or the TIC. They went through their 15,000 simulations at 2.5 as a borrowing rate, at 3.5, and at 4.5. And at 2.5%, they came up with an eye-popping probability of success of over 90%. I've been doing this a long time. I've never seen statistics that high. At 3.5%, it's still really sizable, 84% probability of success. And even at 4.5%, you have a 3 out of 4 chance of doing well. Is that a guarantee? Absolutely not, because at a 73% probability of success, that means there's a 27% probability that you might actually lose money. So there is risk here, and it's important to recognize it. Nevertheless, these statistics are stronger than they have been in the past. However, those are not the only risks you need to be aware of. First of all, the timing of earnings matter. So we worked with a group of school districts, thankfully a very small group, in 2007 who borrowed in the fall of 2007 and then ran headlong into the worst recession we've seen since 1929, where they lost nearly a third of their deposit within a matter of 3 months. That's really hard to recover from. And in fact, I have some statistics that show, based on our latest data, that they have not recovered. They are still in the hole. Also, your credits, your annual credits from this side account are going to be volatile by definition. So that fund is being invested and withdrawn every year, and PERS will give you a credit, but based upon the performance of that fund, one year the credit may be high, the next year it may be low. So even if you're ahead, if you're getting used to a credit being at a certain level and one year they have a bad year and it drops, that may be a very unpleasant surprise. There is a syndrome, again, using the gambling language, of doubling down. So in years where the PERS portfolio is doing poorly, which it has had experience with, your side account is also doing poorly. So you will feel double the impact. The opposite is also true. What this basically communicates is that if you go down this path, it's really, really, really smart to build a reserve against these obvious fluctuations that will absolutely happen. So I want to focus a little on this timing issue, because we have seen all sorts of circumstances. We've seen, it's sort of like Goldilocks, great circumstances, terrible circumstances, and then sort of moderate circumstances. Focusing on my favorite school district, these are 3 live cases, and I have left the names off, but I bet you can kind of figure out who they are. School District A is my favorite case. They issued twice in 2002 and 2003, and then they actually issued again this past summer. They issued at interest rates that are substantially higher than what we're seeing today, so nearly 2% more. And they issued almost $500 million. Because they issued early and had 5 really strong double-digit years of positive investment returns, even though they experienced 2008, they are sitting pretty today. School District B also issued twice in 2005, 2015. They've done well, but not quite as well, even though their borrowing rate was lower. And then there's School District C, which, as I said, keeps me very humble about this. They borrowed in 2007. They borrowed at exactly the same rate as School District A, but because they borrowed right before the crash, they're still underwater. Let's look at the specifics. School District A borrowed $491 million. At last accounting, so everything from PERS is very dated. The last public information we have is as of December 31st, 2020. The value of their side account after 18 years of drawdowns was almost as large as what they deposited in the beginning. That is not supposed to happen. And that's because they have had very, very strong investment returns. We calculate that to date, they've already saved over $300 million. And we expect that based upon the model's assumption of returns, they will save another $150 million. School District B, not quite as strong. They've only saved 40 million, and we project they're going to save about 4 million more. Still a good story. And then there's School District C that borrowed $40 million. To date, they've lost about 2.6, and over the course of the next 5 years, we think their costs are going to rise. Now, keep in mind, this doesn't reflect rates of return through 2021 because the latest data we have is through 2020. So my hope is their situation is a little better than this, but basically they're staring at a $10 million reduction over what they would have had they done nothing.
Carol, I'm wondering if we have about 10 minutes left in this agenda item. I'm wondering if we might stop partway through and ask questions, or are you close to summing up and then we can do questions after?
Well, I do have Lane's numbers that I want to show. But if there are a couple of questions, I am happy to entertain them now.
Are there any, Mike?
So if we go into this at say 3.5% and the market performs poorly for the next 18 months, is our relatively low interest rate, does that still result in an advantage to us, or is the decline in the market, if it does go down, is that so powerful that it wouldn't matter that we had such a low interest rate?
It probably doesn't matter. And I will show that in the numbers. So
thank you.
You're welcome.
It's Rosie followed by Austin.
Hi, thank you, Carol. It's really helpful to get this explanation. My question is about how this benefits Lane on a pragmatic level. Is it correct to understand that by taking this approach, borrowing funds to deposit against our PERS liability, that loan has to be repaid? Are we saying that the fact that we're now not taking as much out of the general fund on an annual basis to cover that liability, we use what we budget in the general fund to put against that loan liability? Is that how this works?
Sort of. And I actually think if I could be forgiven for being a control freak here, a lot of these questions are numbers questions that will become much more understandable, I think, if I can walk you through how this works. So what I'd suggest is, unless someone else has a more qualitative question, let me keep going, and then does that work for you, Austin? Okay, thank you. Was there anybody else who had their hand up?
So Austin, did that work for you?
Yeah, I do have a qualitative question, but I can wait till we look at the numbers.
Okay, so go ahead, Susan. We do have several other agenda items this evening, so I want to make sure we have time for questions at the end as well of this topic.
Okay. All right. So Rosie, to your question, I think this table, which has a ton of numbers, but I think we're not going to go over anywhere close to all of them, will help understand or talk about what's going on. So The top box shows dollar amounts that you have been paying. I think this is, I can't see the header. I don't know if you guys can, but this first column is the 2007 valuation, selected because it was the final valuation before the stock market crash in 2008. And then here is the 2020 valuation. So that's the latest data. Here is Lane Community College's information. In 2007, you were assigned an unfunded actuarial liability. That's code for what your share of the shortfall at PERS was of roughly 12.7 million. However, because you had done a bond in 2003, and it had performance very similar to school district A, your side account was worth nearly $80 million, which meant that back in 2007, you had a surplus of $65 million at the PERS system. Fast forward to 2020, because of the 2008 crash, your shortfall has grown to $111 million. You still have a side account and it's still quite healthy. It's about 47 million, but net, again, largely because of 2008, your share of the shortfall is nearly $65 million. That shows up in the percentage that you pay to PERS. That percentage back in 2007 was essentially zero. Why? Because you had a side account credit of 13% that was more than the pension rate itself. So when you're doing this, this is like a replacement cost where your PERS rate goes down, and on the other side, you have debt. And that debt is hopefully covered by the reduction, the reduction in pension costs that you pay. So it was zero back in 2007. It's now looking like it's going to be more like 14% of your payroll for Tier 1 and 12 for OBSERV. Moving on, this is your performance on your existing bond. You borrowed nearly $52 million in 2003, and you have saved $26 million so far. That's in total about 18 million on a present value basis. Further, we project that over the life of the bonds, the remaining life, you're going to save another 13 million. Okay, now let's look at the question I was asked earlier, which is what happens if you borrow again and you have a terrible year? We looked at 3 different scenarios. This first scenario assumes you borrow the full amount and you earn exactly what the PERS model says you're going to earn, which is 6.9% each and every year. In that case, you're borrowing at 3.5, you're earning 6.9. Guess what? You're making money. You'd make about $30 million. But I want to focus on option 3, scenario 3, which is exactly the experience that those who borrowed in 2007 experienced, where they borrow immediately, 3 months later, they lose 27%, and then the rate of return for the remainder is exactly what we've experienced since 2008. And here's the thing that really startled me when I first saw this. Even in that circumstance, you still save money. nowhere near as much. And there are years, 4 years, in fact, where your rate credit is lower than your debt service. So you'd be in the hole. But you would be right to say, wait a minute, didn't you say that school district C was in the hole and will continue to be in the hole? And yes, I did say that. But here's the difference. School district C borrowed at 5.67%. In your case, we have run these numbers at 3.5. So at that level, even with a 27% loss, you would still save money. And now I'm going to shut up and let any available time, and I'm sorry if I went over.
Okay, so I had Austin in the queue, and that will be followed by Steve.
So 2 questions. One, inflation with inflation the way it is, does that also kind of help with the increasing the likelihood of profitability with the interest rates the way they are? Or is that kind of a outside factor, a variable that quite frankly doesn't have an impact?
So actually, inflation is the enemy.
Is the enemy in this situation. Got it. Thank you.
Is the enemy, because with inflation, that tends to drive interest rates higher. So in fact, the whole movement from last summer to today, when we were talking about 2.5%, is attributable to the fact that inflation is now at roughly 7%, whereas it was at 2%.
Understood. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Steve?
Are we eligible to refinance the current the bond that we're obligated to now at better rates? And well, if so, why haven't we done that already? And maybe that's a moot point, but why can't we do it now instead of floating a new one altogether?
So that would be super nice, but unfortunately, back in 2003, the taxable municipal market was not as open and flexible as it is today. And there effectively is such a punitive prepayment provision that you would not save any money if you refinanced it. Since about 2018, the prepayment provisions have mimicked what you get regularly on like your GO bonds. So theoretically, if interest rates went down, you did one now, you could refinance it, but unfortunately the 2003 is off limits.
And the follow-up, is there any reason why are we talking about this now as opposed to 3 years ago or whatever? Why is there a reason it's coming up now, or it just happens to be now we have time to think about it, or is there a more kind of strategic reason why this is coming up?
So we've done this. We've done this analysis a couple times. PCC and Temecula went out last year, but I think a lot of it has to do with transition, Steve. So it's part of getting this in front, and as we're starting to see the market go, again, it's timing. So to Carol's point, there's a lot of risk to this piece, but
Carol, did you also want to respond to that question?
No.
Okay. Steve, did you have another question? Any other questions or comments from the board? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Okay, so Carol, I know that you had, I think, at least one more slide that was about the timeline. Did you want to discuss that?
If I still have time, sure. This is not a timeline for you. This is a timeline that is one that we are working with a group that is about a month ahead of you. But to give you a sense of the ingredients, putting a pension bond together takes a lot longer than putting a GO bond together once the election has occurred, largely because there's a new piece that gets injected in the middle, and that is by PERS policy, you are required to request an analysis from their actuary before you can make a deposit. So that process takes 45 days and means that once you go through this, you're really looking at a 5 to 6 month timeline. One thing I want to totally emphasize here is that because it's such a long timeline, there are many, many, many opportunities to go for the exits. So for example, the traditional form of resolution that would be offered to you for approval if you wanted to take this to the next step has a line item for a maximum interest rate. So for example, you could set a maximum interest rate of 3.5%. And if the interest rate went above that, then the staff would not be authorized to proceed. If you are interested, I would encourage you to build at least a little cushion. But we have had school districts come to us and say, no, 3.5 is good. You can get it done there, great. Furthermore, after that, if you decide that the market is not where you want it to be, there are many other timelines where you can say, you know what, I don't care if the interest rate is where I said I wanted it to be. I'm still not comfortable. Let's not pursue this. So if you decided that, say, at your next board meeting, you wanted to consider a resolution and you wanted to proceed as quickly as possible thereafter, chances are you would be looking at a financing that would sell bonds probably in June, close at the end of July, and have your payroll rates be reduced by the 1st of August.
Hey,
And that's all I wanted to share.
any other questions and comments from the board? All right, well, thank you very much. I think you gave us quite a bit to think about. And so as I understand that if we have additional questions or comments, we can follow up with you directly, or we should follow up with Greg, because I see you provided your email address on in the slideshow.
You know, it's probably better if you funnel it through Greg.
Okay, great.
But I am happy to provide additional information.
Okay, great. And Greg, do you have any next steps for us that you want to share?
No, I think you have plenty to think about and this current. I'll circle back with Dr. Stalliard and Dr. Hamilton.
Okay, great. Thank you both very much.
You're right.
Good
night, everybody.
I'm actually a little shocked at how much I'm understanding.
I'm actually shocked at how fast I went through this, and the fact that you understood it makes me feel really good. So
thank you.
All right.
All right, so let's go ahead and we're going to hear a FQHC and Cottage Grove update from President Hamilton.
Thank you, Chair Fragala. This is just an update because it seems like it's about every quarter I pop in and just update you on where we are with Cottage Grove. There's a lot of materials that were in your packet. I'm not going to go over them all. Nothing, really none of it is new. I just want to tell you things are going very well. It's very slow when you work with multiple partners though. And, you know, there was a lot of changing of the guard at Health and Human Services. You know, they have Eve is their new director there now. So I actually met with her this morning and welcomed her to her new position and just said, we're going to be working together. So for those of you that are not as familiar with this, it was literally 5 years ago when Be Your Best came to see me. They said they'd been talking about this for a decade. They need, and as you read in the materials, they desperately need a health center. And Cottage Grove even in 2017 was so underused. I mean, it just was not making any revenue. So the idea was that if they could have half of the facility, we'd still run, actually we would run more allied health programs on one side and they would run the clinic on the other side. So for the past 4 years, we've been raising money. It's not us. This is the county. It's a county project. They've raised, I mean, it's amazing. I've watched it in awe. They've raised pretty much all the money. And the only thing slowing down, putting a shovel in the ground is the 1.5 million that's been sponsored by Congressman DeFazio, because as you know, that those wheels at the federal level turn slowly. And that's pretty much the last piece. Just to give you an idea of all the funders that are on board, let's see, the YARG Foundation, the OCF Community Wellness Foundation, Center Fork Fund Foundation, Peace Health, Trillium, the county itself, Pacific Source. I mean, and the list goes on and on. A lot of these folks are giving as much as $700,000-800,000. So it's a great project. It's still in the works. Mike, our council, has been finishing up. He's about ready to finish up on a lease agreement. We will get revenue. We will get regular revenue with escalation every year, which is a great thing. And I would say although Brett would be know a little bit more about this than I would, but it's going to be a couple of months, I think, before we know for sure if we're going to get, when we're going to get that 1.5 million. When I say we, I mean the partnership for this. Any questions on Cottage Grove?
Thumbs up. Okay, so not seeing any questions or comments. Thanks for the update, Marge. Okay, so I'm going to move us on to fiscal year 23 budget and tuition discussion. And I've got Provost Gerald and AVP Zach Evans.
Thank you, Chair Fragola, and very happy birthday to you. That's exciting to get to spend that. We should have made cupcakes or something. My apologies. Good evening, President Hamilton, board members. We have a couple of items here kind of nestled together, a discussion about budget and discussion about tuition. I believe we want to do the budget update first, Zach, is that correct? And Zach will lead that, and then I'll walk us through the tuition one. But you're getting inundated with numbers at this session tonight.
Yes, and thank you, Paul. I'm going to ask Brett if he doesn't mind sharing the budget update. That is the tuition, the other separate PDF. Thank you.
If
Excellent.
possible, and you can make it a little bit bigger for people who aren't looking at it on another screen as well.
I'm sorry, I'll get there.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brett.
Okay, so just a quick update today or tonight. The Budget Development Subcommittee continues to meet weekly and is engaging in some difficult conversations. And their goal is to submit a balancing proposal to College Council and host a campus budget forum within the coming weeks. Tentative placeholders for the budget committee meetings with our 14 members and our 7 citizen members would be May 4th, Wednesday, May 4th through Wednesday, May 25th, if needed, and more information will be coming out about those soon. So the positive news, looking at the blue column for FY22, is that as we got the full first month of winter term in, our numbers are starting to shift. So we got another data point to help us track down this on our forecasting. Another piece of positive news is we are starting to see some enrollment numbers for spring term, and enrollments, total credits, and unofficial FTE are all up double digits compared to last year. So it's still a little early, but we're seeing some positive momentum in those enrollment news. Looking at 22, still as we're talking about the blue column, we reference a lot when we do these the college PERS reserve. And that is money that the college set aside in Fund 9 to help us with those ebbs and flows that happens at the side account level. The college PERS reserve at the bottom of this page is not the side account that's held at the state level. So this year, there's a planned use of $860,000 to stabilize our other personnel expenditure rates or OPE rates. And then right now, tentatively, if we continue that practice, another use of it, the $860,000 next year. And those gray boxes at the bottom of this page kind of show how that balance is, we're withdrawing from it, how it's reducing over time. One of the other items that we have continually talked about almost for the last 2 years now has been the Higher Education Emergency Relief Funding, or HERF. The college did not request an extension with the Department of Education to extend those funds. So what is going to happen is that we fully intend to draw down the remaining money that we have and spend the rest of those grants this year. There is a small portion that carries over that will expire in August. The large institutional grant expires in May. So we're going to have a 3-month period where if we have continuing projects that would require more time post-May, we're going to transition them over to the other small grant and fully exhaust our institutional money. So with saying that and fully utilizing the HERF funds this year at a future board meeting, in order to support next year's budget planning, the administration is going to bring a request to the board to establish a COVID reserve. And how we would do this mechanically through Oregon budget law is we're going to bring a supplemental budget. So when I bring a supplemental budget process, if the change is less than 10% to the total expenditures of a fund, we can do it at a regular board meeting and no budget hearing is needed. So just knowing that as we're moving forward, that's coming. Looking at the orange column in 23, the first, we've had a change for the better from the last time that we showed this in January. So what happened is, like I mentioned, better information for the month of January to help us forecast into the next year. A big notice or something that I want to call out as we're looking at this is right now our OPE rates, other personnel expenditures, which are our payroll taxes, PERS, insurance, fringe benefits. Our rates for this year are 67% for contracted positions and 40% for part-time positions. Through doing the analysis on our PERS rates, I'm comfortable lowering our contracted rate 1 percentage point, taking it from 67 to 66%. So that's a big change that happened on the orange column. And we're closely monitoring spring term enrollments to give us maybe another indicator of how enrollment would push out into the next academic year. Page 2 of this, real quick, so I know everybody wants to hear Paul. So going through this on page 2 is our fund balance worksheet. The positive news on this worksheet is we're forecasting at this time a surplus in the general fund, which then would forecasted bring our estimated end of the year general fund balance to above 10%. And then page 3 of this is some of our levers that we're continuing to review and apply into our budget planning for next year. And one of the sections that I wanted to add here is opportunities at the bottom. There is optimism about receiving state funding for a cybersecurity initiative, which could generate, well, not generate, bring in additional state dollars to the college. Future Ready Oregon, which the board passed a resolution earlier this evening, is the state funding for CTE and workforce development. And then if there are any questions about the OHSU 30-30-30 or the emergency legislative funding request, I will turn it over to Brett.
Hey, so are there any questions or comments on that part of this agenda item? Austin?
I'm sorry, Brett, can you pull up that document once again? And my question was in regards to the expenses for full-time and part-time employees. And is that a number for the 2023? Does that also include the paid family leave employee deduction or employer deductions? I apologize. Is that calculated in that? Because I know the paid family leave program is starting in September of 2022 or 2022, and then it's in effect in January 1st, 2023. But we'll be paying into it in the later half of 2022, and of course all of 2023. So I just wanted to verify if that was in the calculus of that or not.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it is not. So I will look into that and connect with Shane Turner in HR and get back to you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yep. Quick follow-up question too. And this is in regards to the reserve fund. So that reserve fund exists due to a board policy. Is there any other obligation, or is there another reason why we have that?
The COVID reserve, or or the PERS reserve.
The PERS reserve.
I don't know if it's tied to a board policy. I do know that there's been periodic transactions throughout the last decade from the general fund that have put money into it. But I don't know if it was tied, when it was created, if it was tied specifically to a board policy.
Understood. Thank you.
I will look into it though.
Appreciate it.
I have a question. So Zach, you said that we're gonna spend down the HERFA funds. It sounds like we're gonna be considering a COVID reserve for what we don't have to spend down. So does that document, the green, blue, and salmon columns, does it reflect the spend down of the HERFA dollars for 23 and 22?
It reflects it for, there's a line item in there, the federal stimulus of $4.5 million. That reflects the spend down of HERF for 22, knowing that there's still some room above that we're still tracking as we wrap up some of our longer projects and the personnel costs that are there. Next year, it does not right now include a COVID reserve in the salmon column.
Okay, great, good. I wasn't sure what the revenue section was, but that makes sense. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you very much. Let's go ahead and go on to the second part of the discussion.
Well, thank you, and good evening again. We've had conversations a couple times around benefits to students for taking more credits, right? All of the early momentum indicators, and this is true at Lane and nationwide, show that if students take more credits, not even just attempt more credits, that they persist at higher rates, they are retained at higher rates, they have higher completion, and they graduate or complete with less debt and enter the workforce sooner. This has been really the focus of, you've heard us talk a lot about our guided pathways work that we're doing and the implementation that our teams are working on around guided pathways. It really is centered around that, trying to get students on the path and to take credits that allow them to complete sooner. One of the ways that there are a couple ways to try to incentivize or to encourage students to take more credits. Sometimes there's putting a cap on tuition that the maximum a student will ever pay is X number of dollars. Anything above that credit-wise is free. Or more commonly, we see colleges implement what's known as banded tuition. So banded tuition is where, there'll be a range of credits and we'll charge a certain tuition for that range, right within that range. Obviously, within the range, depending upon where it's priced, some students might pay a little bit more if they take at the lower end of the range, but we incentivize them to take at the upper end of the range or move up into the next band to receive tuition discounts. This model is usually used at four-year institutions, and it's usually only for full-time status, so students that are 15 plus credits. We see significant advantages, though, to trying a model like this to incentivize more credit-taking behavior in students that are even part-time, either to take more classes if they're still part-time or to move into that full-time status. I mean, bear in mind that at Lane, about 55% of our students are part-time. That means by definition of this is less than 12 credits, right? So we're really looking at ways to try to get them to 15. It's a little bit of misleading to say you're full-time at 12 because it would take you 3 years to finish a 2-year program if you only took 12 credits a term. So the push really is to recognize that 15 credits per term is the mark and the sweet spot for students to be able to finish on time and finish with higher rates and for us to retain students better. I'm going to share my screen and talk a little bit about the model that I wanted to start discussing today. And it's just a model. We're presenting an option. We're realizing that, as you are aware, and it's painful, we have lost a lot of students. We're trying to figure out ways to retain students at higher rates and actually to have marketing and recruiting. And we think that there are benefits to a banded tuition model also for marketing and recruiting and getting new students as well as our current students being retained at higher rates and taking more credits. So let me share my screen here. I'm going to start kind of in the middle of the presentation that you have that was added there. I assume you all can see this okay? Yep, okay, great. So basically the structure that we put together, what we wanted to do when we looked at this was to ask questions about, is there a way that, and I'll back up for a second and say, the hesitation or fear, I think, for switching to a banded tuition model is the uncertainty of it, right? That we don't want to do anything, especially in declining enrollments and fiscal challenging times, to do something that might jeopardize the institution in terms of our ability to collect revenue. So we looked at that and wanted to show a model that would generate the same amount of revenue as if we just had a flat tuition increase across the board per credit, but reward students for taking more credits by having significant tuition discounts. So that's the goal of this structure that we put together. We kind of limped into this a little bit with the international program 2 years ago. We implemented a banded tuition model. Very different reasons. We did it there more as a recruiting and marketing tool as opposed to getting students to take more credits here. But it has seemed to have worked well. We have maintained pretty strong enrollments even during the economic downturn that we've had recently due to the pandemic as well. So here's what the structure would be for potentially for Lane. And this is the same banding structure that we have for the international program. It's linked to financial aid. 1 to 5 credits, financial aid considers you less than half-time student. If you take 6 to 8 credits, you're considered a half-time student, and that gives you a significant different award. If you're 9 to 11, you're considered 3/4 time, again, another bump in it, and you're considered full-time for financial aid as far as your award at 12 credits plus. Now, as I mentioned, we have about 45 students that 45% of our students are 12 credits plus, but true full-time is 15. we only have about 10% of our students that take 15 credits or more. So we really are trying to push this credit taking behavior, even in these lower bands, toward the upper end of the band. Again, just take more credits. You're gonna get done sooner, or move to the next band to get done sooner. So that's really our motivation here. So again, our goal was to price this in a way, or to think about what this might look like, that puts the least amount, I guess, of fiscal risk for. There's always some risk, it's an unknown, right? But we wanted to see, was there a way we could price it that would put the least amount of risk? And I will tell you, for the two models that I'm going to just show you here as exemplars, they both yield similar amounts of revenue, whether we had a flat tuition structure or a banded tuition structure within a certain percent increase or keeping flat. Okay, so for case study A, just to kind of get a look here, this slide focuses on that full-time band, which is what I want to focus on from a student benefit point of view right now, but I'll show you in a second that there's also benefits for our part-time students that couldn't necessarily become full-time because of other commitments that they might have. So if you just pick a multiplier here for an increase, and we picked 5%, I got two models to show you, 5% and 7%. As Zach indicated, we're looking at trying to close a multi-million-dollar deficit. And as far as revenue is concerned, we either need new students or current students to take more credits, or we need to raise tuition, or a combination of both to be able to raise revenue significantly. So just as an example, we picked 5% and 7% to kind of show you what this might look like. And if you focus on the 5% and you just look at the bottom here, basically, our current tuition rate per credit is 126 for this year, right? And we're looking at what would it be next year if we implemented this model, a 5% base increase. So the per credit rate would be 132.50 instead of 126, right? And implement that banding structure that we put. What would it look like if you were in this full-time band? If I want to tell you, okay, I know you're full-time for financial aid at 12, I want you full-time to complete at 15. What does that look for you, and how can I incentivize that, right? And so with this particular model in the banding of 12, this has the price of the band. Here you can see in this middle, the banded tuition cost here. That price right there was determined at 13.5 credits. So it's not midpoint of the band. It's not at the bottom. It's not at the top. It's closer to the bottom. 13.5 credits is where we set that band. And by doing so, that allows us to generate the same revenue across the board as if we just had a flat per credit raise. And you can see at this, that if you focus on that yellow row at the bottom, that a student would see a significant increase if they still only took 12 credits, although increases in financial aid would cover a significant portion of that. If they could only take 12, they would see a significant increase. But look what happens if we can convince them to take 15. They now are paying less tuition next year as they are this year. They're taking 15 credits and they are finishing sooner, on time, with less debt. So this is the value added piece for the student. This is the student centric piece of this, is to try to get those students to move up to that 15, right? And that's what that would look like. And you can see, obviously, if they took more than 15 credits, very few of our students take more than 15 credits. It's negligible, really. They even have a greater reduction. But the real benefit comes in that if we can get them from 12 to 15, right, or into this 12 to 15 range, it's really beneficial for students economically, time, and just their likelihood to continue. The story's similar with a 7% increase. The total revenue that we would generate obviously is more because the base increase of 7% is more. But if you look again at this 12 to 18 range and ask the question, a student would pay more, certainly more at the 12 if they only took 12 than they would currently right now. But again, look, even with this, they're really saving even more money, right, by taking 15 credits again. So this is incentivizing them to move to that 15 credit level because it is a value for them. Okay, I'll stop here. I think if you want me to take questions on these two here, I see Mike raised his hand. It might be easier.
Great,
And then I'll
thanks.
show you bet, and then I'll show you some others there. So I'll let you, do you want to call
Yeah,
them?
go ahead, Mike.
Yes. Do we know why our students don't take more credits than they do? It occurs to me that if our students are constrained from being able to take credits because they might be parents and working full time,
Yeah.
that incentivizing them to take more credits may not help them take more credits.
That, that's interesting, Mike. Yes, that's true. We don't know why. Our students live complex lives, right? I mean, they might be single parents. They might be, they might have to work. They might have complicating factors. So clearly not every student is capable of taking more credits, right? I mean, I believe that. But I also feel like, and studies have shown this, when students do take more credits, they do succeed at that. And this is in community college, right? So it is kind of a misconception when you hear people say our students can't take 15 credits. It's true, some students can't, and I'm not marginalizing that. That is true, some students can't. But many that aren't could. They just don't. Maybe because it costs more, or maybe because they can max out their financial aid at 12, so they're only going to take 12, and they don't see the value of taking more because they're paying more money, right? And we're trying to show that you actually could. We're trying to incentivize that. And I think with adequate support, and we have a significant amount of support for our students, I think that we could see many of them convert to this next level. And if they can't convert and increase credits, the increase or the impact to them, while it's significant, in terms of a tuition raise at the lower end of the band, it's still manageable, I think, within the financial aid packets and the financial aid awards and the Pell Awards and things like that. It's not as significant of an increase as if they were paying out of pocket necessarily.
Okay, so
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah.
I see Marge raise your hand, and then we'll go to Rosie and then Steve.
Just a quick comment to reiterate what Paul said. I've been tracking this literature for a decade. People do not it's a misconception that if you take less credits, you'll complete. Actually, the literature shows the opposite. And we have been enabling students to not complete. And the less credits they take, the more likely they are to drop out and never finish their program. And we've been trying to attack this for years. I think banding will push us in the right direction.
And I'll also say, to tag on to that, Marge, a little bit, the longer students are with us, and this is an odd thing, right? But the longer they're with us, the more opportunities there are for them to drop out, right? I mean, this is why I don't like quarters and I like semesters, right? If you're on quarters, you've got all these transition points from term to term when someone can choose not to enroll, right? And it happens. And we know that if you string a 2-year program out over 3 years, they're just less likely. Life happens over a period of 3 years, right? And they're just less likely to be able to complete. And I think with proper support, we have a lot going on at this college with holistic student supports to try to help our students. I think getting them to a job or transferred sooner is probably one of the best things we could do for their long-term success.
Rosie,
and this is one way to try to do it. We don't know it'll happen, right? But I think we need to try something.
Rosie and then Steve.
Well, thank you very much for this information. I really, really appreciate the creativity we're seeing in this. It's exactly the kind of out of the box, maybe not so far out of the box, given what you've told us as background, that this is. I would be interested when you present this for board action to see an analysis of this banding that starts at current tuition.
Yeah, so I can.
Let me, you know that I don't support tuition increases. I really think we are shooting ourselves in the foot year after year after year. And so I want to see a full analysis of the budgetary impact of doing projections, of doing this with an increase and doing this without an increase. I'm also interested in hearing more about what it would take to expand our childcare operation at Lane. I think we can, I understand the logic of giving students a financial incentive to take more credits. I also think there are huge life obstacles to our particular student body, to taking more credits, and working and childcare issues are two big ones. And so I'm interested in knowing what access might we have to resources that could enable us to expand not only the amount of childcare that we can make available, but how can we reduce its cost as well? And finally, I'm interested in knowing what percentage of Lane students receive financial aid. How many students who might benefit from this banding actually receive financial aid? Because it isn't 100%. So it is a significant hit to a certain percentage of our students, and I would like to know how many. So first of all, let me just compliment you all for the approach. It's what I've been looking for. It's what I'm interested in supporting. It's going to be challenging for me to support it with an embedded tuition increase. Thank
Yeah, I appreciate that, Rosie. And it's hard for me to pass cost on to students too, because I know the impact it has. And I know that if I know what the cost is if they don't come to school, right? And I think that's what we need to avoid. I will tell you, we did do the analysis with just keeping it flat. There's no change. I mean, because of the structure, we generate the same revenue at $126 per credit as we would at building this model on $126 per credit, like I've done here with an increase. We generate the same revenue. The issue for us would be that we wouldn't generate any additional revenue if we kept this flat, right? And that's a hard one when and I appreciate what you're saying, and you can tell me all day long, but it's just hard when I'm looking at a $9 million gap to close, trying to figure out how to generate some revenue as part of that. So it's not all on expense cuts, which is really challenging also, as you know.
Steve?
We'll work on getting you that. I've got some information for childcare that I can put together for you as well. So yeah, thank you for the comments.
Well, I'll say, like others, that, I certainly appreciate the creative thinking and all the rest. Unfortunately, Paul, I think I'm going to pile on a little bit here with things that Mike and Rosie both said. I am also, or I guess I don't want to put words in their mouth, but I am feeling skeptical for reasons similar that they expressed. I am not yet convinced, based on what you're showing here, that we can successfully move students from 12 credits to 15. If we were, if 95% of the students who are currently taking 12 move to 15, okay, great, this is a success. We would have 5% that would be really upset, but perhaps that's acceptable. But I just don't, I guess I just feel like I need to see a lot more analysis and evidence that where we think we would land, because this also has significant potential to backfire. And our students say, wow, you just significantly raised the cost of attendance for me, and you don't understand my life at all. 12 credits is what I'm doing because of all these, complex things. You just made my life harder. And of course, that's not what you're trying to do. I get that, but the potential for this to backfire in my mind is significant. So I would just want to, get some more analysis, along the lines of what Rosie was saying, so we can really understand the numbers of students of sole effect and how financial aid may, pad the impact, all that kind of thing. But also if there are ways to test this, in ways that don't have as big a potential to backfire, on a pilot group, or I don't know, I'll leave that to you to think through, but I would like to see not the all or nothing approach.
Yeah, thank you.
So I have Austin in the queue and then myself.
Yeah, I agree with you that we usually see this type of model at a university level. I saw this when I went to the University of Idaho, and we had a similar type of base rate kind of costing effect that you're kind of showing here. It was different, but it was a really similar concept. This also would help with like operations costs too, right? We would have more students that would be in certain classrooms that might have been canceled otherwise if we didn't have increased a number of students within certain classes. So it helps with like scheduling, proper appropriation of staff time, proper appropriation and kind of a greater attendance of students who would be taking classes they otherwise would not be. So there's also like kind of an operational savings, but also better utilization of our expenses as well. Is that correct, Paul?
Yeah, so yeah, you hit that. I'm glad you mentioned that. So the goal would be to absorb additional credits that students would be taking in existing classes that aren't currently full, right? Our capacity rate is actually pretty low. So we know even without adding additional expense, we can take on more enrollments without adding additional expenses. And it's not true across the board in all disciplines, but in general, that's true. So it should, if we can drive more credit taking behavior with current students, it should make us more efficient in the classroom with the expense side as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. So essentially the increase in capacity isn't necessarily an additional expense, but actually a better utilization of current expenses.
That is correct.
And I know that's difficult to see from an organizational dynamic perspective, especially as a board member. But as far as organizational dynamics, there's some great benefits to that that you can see on the back end as opposed to the front end. So I just wanted to advocate for that to the board. So.
Yeah, I have myself in the queue, but Richard, I saw you raised your hand. Did you have something you wanted to share?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Chair. There was a question on the current Pell recipient. For last fall, overall, it's 31%, but those students with 12 plus credit hours have a much larger share, pushing 40%. And that is why the banding is aimed to help students move up to the next level so they would be eligible for a larger award. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you. And I'm sorry, Lisa, you had a question.
No, go ahead, Paul, if you wanted to also add to that.
The other two slides, I mean, I'll just summarize. The other two slides that are in here just show again the benefit to the student to take that upper end of the band in terms of tuition, is that even with the raises and fairly substantive raises, right? I'll admit to that. There's still a savings and a reduction in current tuition if they can get themselves to that upper band. So that's the incentivizing piece. And I hear you, Steve. I worry about the unintended consequences because I don't have a crystal ball that I'm really confident in. And I know these are human lives we're monkeying with, and I don't take that lightly. So I do appreciate what you're saying, and I certainly do take that to heart. So thank you for those comments too.
And I'll just very quickly interject. I'm sorry, I don't suggest for a second, Paul, that you have anything but the best intentions. So I don't want you to.
I know, I didn't take it that way. Yeah.
I have concerns. I know you must have them too.
Yeah, thank you. I do.
Okay. So I have myself in the queue, and then we'll go to Austin, and then go to Holly, and then Austin. So I just wanted to also express my appreciation for the thinking outside the box, for the creativity. I feel like that's something the board has really been looking for. And my understanding is that this has been successful with the international student program. And so we do have a test group that we've seen positive results. And I find that very encouraging. I find the increases in enrollment that we're hearing about to be really encouraging. And I have my own personal experiences now working on the LCC campus in higher ed. Like, there's an increasing excitement that we're all noticing about people wanting to get back to school. And so I'm really excited about that. I've also been trying to educate myself about the impacts of tuition on enrollment and on student success. And, I've just started diving in. There's a lot of literature out there, but the thing that I did notice, some of the things that Paul pointed out, that finishing sooner with less debt is, I mean, it's almost, I don't know why I feel like it's counterintuitive, but this, like, taking more credits students are actually more successful. And I actually think I see that in my personal experience working with students too. But the idea of getting them through a 2-year program in 3 years, like we've talked about that problem of them not being on a pathway to finish in a timely manner, which increases their debt. So I really find the banding proposal to be attractive for a lot of reasons related to student success. I'm not sure how we can do it in a way that is strategic. I know we have seen success with the international student program. And so I'm interested to continue to explore this option. So I have Holly, and then Angela, and then Austin. And we do have about another 5 minutes left in the time for this, but we can always extend as well. So Holly and then Angela.
Thank you. Paul, has there ever been, or is there any data or any surveys that were conducted to assess why students only take 6 credits or less than the 15 credits? And then do you have any information to
I
share
don't
with
have
us?
that data. I mean, I can say it's complicated, right? And our students are we have a wide variety of students that are capable and have different supports and privileges, certainly, that allow them to be able to take more credits. I think, honestly, Holly, I really feel that in general, I'm not speaking of experience at Lane, but in general, I think we often give bad advice to students. I think students often hear, you know what, you're telling me that you have a really complicated life. Maybe you should only take 6 credits and try it, right? When we know the data don't show that, right? The data show that, if I can support you, and you can figure it out with your life, and I can support you with things here on campus. We're trying to do holistic student supports. We're trying to provide, benefits to students. I mean, I think that's the childcare thing. If we can figure that out to grow that even more, I think that some of that's the barriers that some students have. But I really feel a majority of students just feel they can't or aren't capable or haven't been advised that they should.
Is that something that you all would look into then
Almost
and try to
definitely.
find? Okay.
Yeah,
Because
most
it's
definitely.
not just childcare, I don't think. I mean, that probably is a big one, but
Yeah.
Thank
you. Marge, raise her hand. Marge.
Yeah, we actually have, I could say we have the study. It's the HOPE study, I think, Paul, that, this is a national problem. This isn't Lane, right? So the HOPE study is coming out of the Community College Research Center in New York, and Oregon bought into it, and we'll get a hold of our stats. But at the end of the day, they're looking at everything you hear about in the papers every day, right? Homelessness, food insecurity, housing insecurity, childcare. Rosie's spot on with that. And that's why, Rosie, we're taking that real serious, by the way, on how we can ramp that up. It's everything we read in the papers every day. So that said, though, we still have that core of students who want to transfer, they want to go to the university, and yet they take 12 and they are capable of taking 15. And those are those students that we want to push, because we know from these studies that the longer they stay here, the less likely they are to complete, as Paul said. So we are a little biased because we've been reading this literature for years. Yet the answer to the question, Holly, is really big stuff. It's serious stuff. The food insecurity and all that. So bills like Future Ready Oregon is going to help us pay for childcare. That bill, if they're in allied health, if they're in those 3 sectors, it's actually going to pay for childcare. It's actually going to pay for a lot of the barriers that it costs us so much, the wraparound services and all that. So there's just so many plates in the air right now. If that Future Ready Oregon gets passed, that's going to be a boon to our students to help them in those fields.
Angela, and then Austin.
Thank you. As many have said before me, really interesting model. I'm excited to sort of work through it. And thank you, everybody who was taking my calls and calling me back last night and working late 2 nights in a row. I think one of the things that, so I, not surprisingly, I'm very much aligned with Rosie in that I would find it hard to support a tuition increase in nearly any context. I do think that it would be helpful to understand in terms of banding, if we could get some sense of how many students we think are going to move up in credits sort of as a result of banding, and how that will impact our state FTE-based rolling income. And I think we talked about this a little bit last night, Marge. I understand that if we can incentivize students to take more credits and we can bump our FTE, then that will improve our state-based FTE revenue. But what I don't understand is how much we might expect students to increase their FTE as a result of banding, and how that will impact our revenue, because the revenue obviously will decrease as students take a higher number of credits and get the discount, which is the incentive. But then what sort of offset we can expect from the state revenue? Like, will it fully offset it? Will it more than offset it?
So let me.
I know that that's very nebulous.
Yeah, it's difficult to predict, but I want to clarify something that I think I heard. If within a band, students will pay the same whether they take at the lower end of the band or the upper end of the band. The impact on them is it's a more significant increase in tuition relative to what they're currently paying, right? Or if it was just flat, right? Like a per credit flat rate. So there's no impact to us as far as the revenue goes in terms of moving around within a band. We'll make exactly the same amount of money, whether everybody's at the bottom or everybody's at the top on tuition, right? Where we would make more money is if they move up bands, which we hopefully would be able to lobby and market students to be able to move up to the band. So that would generate more tuition revenue if that happened if students moved up. The FTE one is an interesting one. It's complicated to say the least, but it's a rolling 3-year average. We won't see any impacts due to increased credit taking behavior in current years. We see them in subsequent years. So, because it's always a year delayed.
I've got Austin and then Steve, and then Angela may be back in the queue.
Not only do I see benefits for students that are on financial aid, but I also see us being able to leverage the STEP program, WIOA funds, and other workforce investment type of funds that would, and students who qualify for those, how they could leverage those to get more out of their education, more credits completed, and get their certificates done faster, which leads to them getting into employment faster. And also I also see this as, our students are economic actors, right? Their choice to go to school is an economic decision. And this type of structure would allow them to make an economic decision, have a cost benefit analysis decision, and a decision that would allow them to be able to take more with reduced costs, and also finish faster and complete their degree faster, sooner, which will allow them to receive an income or a higher income faster. So I think that if we put this in place, they're going to be economic actors and see the cost benefit of taking more credits, of increasing the number of credits that they could take on, and so forth. And I see a lot of benefit to this, and I saw it when I was at university, and I was able to graduate in 3 years rather than 4 years because of those type of economic incentives for my bachelor's degree. So I see this as our students are economic actors. They're going to look at this and see the benefit in it, and as a result, will benefit our institution as well. Plus, leveraging programs that we're hopefully going to see more funding.
Yeah, and it's a test too, right? That's the other thing we have to realize. Every year we have an opportunity. We can even do it mid-year, but it's harder. But every year we have an opportunity to change tuition structures and trust me, if this negatively impacts our students, I'll be the first to come to you and say, you know what, we need to try something different. But I think we're at that point right now where we need to try something different, right? And so that's why we presented it now. And it does have a certain amount of risk to it, but we try to do it in a way to mitigate as much of that as we think we can.
Steve and then Rosie.
I'm listening, by the way, and being open-minded about it. The literature, the science that you allude to is compelling to me. I like to be science-based, and if that's telling us, hey, this is a worthwhile thing to try, that's compelling. It is. But of course, now this is the second significantly big risky thing that we've been told about tonight. It's making me a little nervous, I gotta say. Just to be clear, are you talking about this for fall 22? Is that this would take effect that as soon as then?
We could, yeah. And I think the risk isn't an economic risk for us. I think the risk for us is negatively impacting students, certain students. The fiscal impact to us, I think, is the same, right? I mean, regardless of where we land, whether we banned or not banned. The unknown is, can we influence student behavior? And that is a risk. I mean, I'm not going to say it's not. We've mitigated the financial risk, I think, through as much marketing, counseling, and student supports that we could put in front of students. We would mitigate the student risk. So we would have to work actively on that one too.
Is there a way to target the transfer students only? I mean, that's the group for me that this sounds like the best fit for, right? When they go to the university, wherever it is, they're most likely to take a full load, whatever that is, 15, 16 credits, whereas others, so they, the idea of like, hey, you got to get used to this because this is how it's going to be at the university. Like that just feels a little more compelling to me. I have to say that the international student is not for me a compelling sample, because I can come up with reasons in my head instantly why they're just different, right? They're trying to get out as soon as they can and go home, or is one obvious thing that you could be thinking about. So it makes all the reason in the world for them to be as focused as they can for the time that they're here. But in any case, what I see from the limited time I've been here is that our students keep telling us essentially by leaving early that your programs are not actually designed to meet my needs. You guys want me to get a certificate. You guys want me to complete all these additional courses. I don't see the need, they're telling us. And so we're responding, right? Shorter programs, stackable, all that business. We're doing all of that. But are we listening to them enough, right? Because this is us trying to tell them what you really need is X. And I don't know. I have to say, I'm listening. I'm open, trying to be open-minded about it, but I see this as a significant risk. And I hope that there are ways that you can think of to try and get a little bit more into the mindset of our students before we take a vote.
Yeah, and Steve, I'm not trying to convince. I'm trying to educate, right, and just come up with something. I do want to comment on our career technical education students, though, because I actually, when I think of it, I'm the opposite of you. I think, wouldn't it be advantageous for us if we can get them to the workforce sooner, right, with less debt, right? They're making a good wage sooner. That's compounded over the life of their lifetime of their career if we get them in the workforce a year, 2 years sooner, right? So I think that's part of it. But I think also along with that, you hit it right on the head too, is we need certificates that are of the right length and duration that get them in the workforce sooner too. And we're working on that piece also. Yeah.
Marge raised her hand. Then we'll go to Rosie.
Oh, Rosie, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
All right. So 2 points. Ironically, there are cohorts, as Paul said, though, that have to stay on time. Nurses, dental hygienists, physical therapy assistants. They're those licensure programs. You can't just twiddle around. You got to go. So, I mean, I don't. We'd have to talk to financial aid to see if they would allow us to do pockets. But if they allowed us to do a pocket with international, I'm not sure. So we're going to look into that, Steve, because that was a great question. The other thing is a bragging point for Lane. When I got here, one of the first things I did is I looked at our completion rates. Lane had hit an all-time low, and this is the accrediting people tracking us. We were in single digits for completion rates. By the first year, we hit we crossed over 11. We went to 15. We went to 18. We're at 21. I just pulled our iPads. 21% we jumped in over 5 years. And the reason why I'm mentioning that is we know what to do. We know what to do. You got to be spot on with your advising, your coaching, And that's those wraparound things that you all are talking about so much. The question is though, how will this and that and the wraparound all go together? But we know we have to advise them to take more courses, and we have been. We're just hoping we don't, obviously there's risk, but we're hoping it bumps them up too.
They've got Rosie and then Holly.
Just want to clarify. Paul, I like everything you're saying. I'm a big fan of what you proposed, and it's a risk I'm more than willing to take, because we've got to do some things, and I emphasize plural, in order to turn our enrollment projections around. What I am struggling with personally is yet another tuition increase, which will be a financial broadside to more than half, if I understood what Dr. Plott just explained to us, more than half of our student body. We tend to want to explain away a tuition increase by saying, oh, well, financial aid will cover it. Tony McCown used to always tell us that. But the bottom line is not everybody gets financial aid. So it will be a hit. As a person who spent my professional life in marketing, this is so counterintuitive. We should be putting it on sale. We should be trying to attract people with lowered prices and get them here. I think our prospective students are voting with their feet right now. And we, to Holly's point, we're remiss in not understanding what is keeping a student from enrolling in more than 6 or 12 students. And now we have Dr. Plott. There's got to be a way for him to use his marvelous magic and all of his tools to help us understand those issues. I brought up childcare last time we visited, because the state economist told the Lane County Budget Committee that the #1 reason people are not going back to work in this pandemic period is unsafe, unreliable childcare. We have great childcare. We can do more of it if we can. We need to do all these things that we're talking about tonight. But gosh, and I know it's hard not to raise tuition. It's been a crutch at Lane for decades now, but it's an obstacle. I'm convinced it's an obstacle. That's all I wanted to say. I think you're being wonderfully creative, and I appreciate it very much, and I support that. I'm just not sure I can do it with a tuition increase.
Understand fully. And also, if I could kind of talk to your
Brief,
marketing,
and then we'll go to Holly. Okay.
Talk to your marketing side. When people look at total cost of attendance and they compare us to everybody else in the state, it's a full-time total cost of attendance at 15 credits. With a banding like this, with a reduction at the 15th credit level, we will probably show that we are the cheapest college in Oregon to go to for 15 credits, right? As far as total cost of tuition. That's how they market those, and we're compared is on the 15 credit, the full-time 15 credit point.
Hey, Holly.
Thank you. I'll be real brief. First, I have to say I was so excited to get that email from President Hamilton talking about our tuition from spring to spring on the rise. And so that was super exciting. But when I think about this bandit model and going forward, as someone who works in student success, I'm just wondering if the audience we're trying to attract is only those who are at halftime now, current students, or are we being creative and thinking about outreach to high school students, to the new students who are coming in, and starting with them at the beginning of their programs, not freshly advised. So our relations with other organizations, groups, student success programs who are out there recruiting students to pursue post-secondary education. So what kind of relations? I mean, if we're talking about this happening in the fall, we need to get busy, right? And start pushing. But those programs that are out there doing the outreach with our students, our high school seniors right now who are thinking about coming to Lane, are we using our creativity to do some coordination and collaboration with those programs? Or are we just going to throw this on the community and say, hey, we got a tuition increase? I mean, we are coming out of COVID. Times are just difficult for everyone. But if that is part of the plan, the program, student success programs, in the community right now. The Aspire programs and the Gear Up programs and all those programs out there right now. The Black African American Student Success Program. You know, we're out there recruiting students and telling them to pursue post-secondary education, and LCC would be a good option. Are we working with them? LCC working with those programs?
I see Marge raised her hand. Marge, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think the most exciting thing, Holly, we're doing is every new student goes for free the first course. And Brett, marketing, recruiting, they're all out there, high school connections. They're right now getting out in those high schools to make sure that our students know this, because this, it's like anything else. We want you to come in and try us out, right? Come and because if you come in the spring or the summer and you get your free course, we're pretty convinced that we're good enough that you'll want to stay. So that's one of the many things. And I think it's time to bring you maybe a little overview, because Paul's doing a lot. We'll bring you a little package of all the things that are going on right now to drum up business, as we say, but more so tell them how good we are and that we're good for them. We're not just bragging, we're saying we're the right fit for you.
Hey, Rosie and then Steve.
Thank you.
No, okay, thanks, Rosie. Steve.
Well, I feel like I owe you something here, Paul. I've been a fairly harsh critic. I don't want you to ruin your entire night. I am listening. And there's been a few things you said just even in the last few minutes that, essentially our tuition would be the cheapest in the state at a 15 credit level. And some of the things Marge said about, some of the programs which really force students to, keep moving along at a healthy clip and all that. I'm persuaded. I do think it's a gamble and I will probably lose sleep over it. And I know you will too, but I'm persuaded. That's all I want to say.
Good, healthy dialogue leads to progress. So I appreciate the conversations.
Yeah, really, really great conversation. And this is the kind of board that you want to be part of. So it's great to have this dialogue with everybody. So I'm not seeing any other hands. So I'm going to move us on to our all-time favorite, board policies. We have some legal updates, and I know you've missed it after a couple months of not having board policy. So I'm going to let Michael Blade go ahead.
Thanks, Chair Fragler. Yeah, I know everybody's missed it. I will say that there's nothing really risky going on here, so everybody can relax for a second. Brett, could you pull that document up for me? That would be great. As Chair Fragler said, we're doing legal updates. OCCA's team of legal experts got together and provided some updates for board policies that we'd already gone over and adopted. And so I'm bringing those to you all at once. If you've read through the materials, then you'll know that all of these updates really have to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion. So this first policy is board policy 1200, which is the LCC mission. And if we could just scan down a little, you'll see the option, which is adding language that talks about DEI. They have an example there, which would be Lane Community College believes a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion enriches Lane Community College's mission and supports students in achieving their educational goals. That's just obviously an example. If we want to include something about DEI in the mission, we're welcome to do so, or you're welcome to do so. I will point out that none of this is legally required. None of it's necessarily even advised. It's just bringing DEI into these board policies if that is something that the board is of a mind to do. So I don't know if we want to talk about them one by one, or if we want to just go do all.
They're kind of all related, aren't they?
They're all very related. So I was thinking maybe I just go through all of them and then we could talk about them. Okay. So the next one is the Board of Education duties and responsibilities. You see again the current policy. The update they provided two different options, so that you'll see a red and a blue. The red one adds 2 bullet points. assure the board operates in an open, accessible, welcoming spirit and maintains an anti-racist culture, establish policies that ensure LCC operates in an anti-racist manner. I think the blue one is a little, takes the word racist out of it. I don't know if that was a way to, temper that a little bit. But anyway, the option 2 says, ensure the board operates in an open, accessible, welcoming spirit, maintains a culture that supports Lane Community Colleges. And I'm sorry, I missed that bracketed language. That would read, that supports Lane Community College's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and establish policies that ensure Lane Community College operates in a way that supports its commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So again, option 1 and 2 are, you wouldn't put them both in, it would be one or the other. And again, they're also just examples, right? They're not saying that this language must be included. It could be something like this, right? All right, and the next one is the committees. And this is just would be adding a diversity, equity, and inclusion standing committee. I will note, I think it's sort of interesting, the footnote here, it talks about state open meeting laws, and therefore it's not recommended that the Board of Education have standing committees. That's a recommendation or a not recommended recommendation from OCCA's team. And then they go forward and give you an option to have a standing committee, which I think is sort of interesting. But undertaking this option would just be adding a DEI standing committee of the board. Again, not legally required, not even necessarily advisable. In fact, in this instance, maybe not advisable, but an option. The next one is the evaluation of the president. Again, at the bottom of the update, it just adds a criteria in evaluating the president to include performance goals and objectives related to the college's commitment to DEI. And then I don't know if it's the next one is the institutional effectiveness. It includes assessments of goals and objectives with respect to the college's commitment to DEI and inclusion to the fullest extent permitted by law. And then finally, or is that the last one? Yeah,
Yes.
that's the last one. So again, all of them are very, very similar. And I know this board is very committed to DEI. I'll answer any questions that you've got, but I suspect, if you're probably in for one, you're probably in for most, except for maybe the standing committee.
Austin?
And my question is about the standing committee. So essentially the complication is that you would have to announce when the meeting's going to happen, location and so forth. Public comment you have to make time for public comment, all those things. That's essentially the complications they're talking
Yeah,
about.
it's really not a complication. I think it's more of a warning to make sure you do that so that you're not in violation of. And I think that probably stems from community colleges either in Oregon or elsewhere that have these open records or open meetings laws, and they're not following those laws with their committees. And it's just sort of a warning. Hey, if you're going to have these committees, make sure you're following the law. And so because people don't, we recommend you not have standing committees.
Yeah, totally. And just so kind of a follow up to that, they don't have executive sessions, do they? And standing committees?
I'm not sure I'm not sure you couldn't.
Yeah.
I'd have to go back and look at that statute. I've never looked at it for a standing committee. I'm not sure you couldn't have an executive session in a standing committee.
Yeah.
I think you could. You'd have all the same, restrictions that you'd have in a normal board meeting executive session. I think you could have a standing. I don't see why you couldn't. Is that my recall of the statute I don't remember anything about it limiting it to just full meetings.
Understood. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Rosie, and then I myself in the queue.
I don't support having a standing DEI committee of the board because so far in the last few years, the entire board has wanted to participate in DEI professional development activities and discussions, and I'm not convinced that members of the board would want to delegate that important work to a subgroup of the board. So I think when we go to our board meeting, we should not approve a policy that for a standing DEI committee. The other thing I would suggest is that the board support the blue colored language in policy 2200 and all the rest of them. I think they're great inclusions. And while they're not really statements of policy, they're a vivid message about the board's values. And I think we should adopt all of this language, except as noted.
Thank you. And so I'm in agreement about the standing committee with Rosie. I think we have had success with ad hoc committees. We have not had success with standing committees as a board. And I absolutely agree that this is something that the entire board should be engaged in. And I'm proud to be part of a board that has really committed to doing this work, both in our strategic plan. The language here about the president evaluation, we did that in a really strong fashion in our current search, which makes it a very natural transition to having it be part of the way we evaluate a president. So I agree. I'm not in support of starting a standing committee, and I do support adding this language in the other places. I'd like to see this clearly part of these policies. Anybody else? Questions for Michael Blade or comments?
If one question I would have, if we are going to adopt, I know Rosie said she preferred the blue language. We might want to just sort of take the temperature of the room on which of the red or blue.
Okay, we're going to hear from Mike and Steve, and then maybe that'll shed a little light on it.
Yeah, I kind of lean toward the blue language. I'm reluctant to say, just to begin saying what we are against, because that list could get fairly big. So I guess those are the reasons I would lean toward the blue.
Steve?
Yeah, I also prefer the blue. I just feel like, honestly, it's really hard to be clear about what anti-racist means exactly, right? We could find ourselves in all kinds of problems just trying to get clear ourselves. What do we mean by that? But the blue language, what we embrace, what we're trying to head towards, I feel like is a lot more clear.
Austin?
Blue.
Anybody else want to weigh in on the language? So far, heard support for the blue language for option 2 on board policy 2200, and I haven't heard any support for a standing committee, and seeming like there's support to include this language in these other policies. Any other questions for Michael Blade or comments? And remember, this will come back, and we can also discuss it again if anybody wants to pull anything from the consent agenda. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. So Michael, does that give you enough direction?
Yeah, so I think all the language that's suggested with including the blue language, not the red, and not the standing committee language is what I'm hearing. So that's what I will have ready to go at the board meeting.
Great, thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. So that was our last discussion item. So I'm going to go ahead and move us on to future meeting dates and agenda items. So our next regular board meeting is March 2nd. And in March, we have a work session on the 16th. We will also see each other this weekend for some exciting business and moving us forward on the president search for the college. Is there anything before I adjourn the meeting from board members?
Just an observation, Lisa, that you have personally done a lot of work behind the scenes with Deborah and Jill in support of this presidential search. And I want to thank you for that work. The comprehensive set of background materials and instructions that we got from Deborah was really helpful. Your emails have been really helpful. I really appreciate the work you're doing.
Thank you. I'm probably scared to death of fumbling on this process. So sometimes fear is a good motivator, but thank you. And I've had a great team to work with as well. Angela.
Thank you. And thank you for the work on this presidential search. My question actually is also about that. I was thinking that we had discussed having some additional sort of hiring focused DEI training directly before we began interviews with candidates. And I reached out to Deborah after her email about the schedule, and I was wondering if it doesn't seem like there's time to schedule something, but is there like a training that maybe we had recorded that we could all revisit before we begin these interviews?
So we did discuss that on the ad hoc committee and felt that our training with Jill was pretty successful and comprehensive, and that was the training that we did as a board. I do have some materials that I would be happy to share with the board that I had the benefit of being the recipient of in another interview committee that I participated on for the Lane ESD. But I guess we were thinking that the training we got with Jill was quite useful. So would you like me to share? I can follow up on that for you, certainly. And I can share some of the materials that I have and see what we can make available by Saturday.
Yeah, I think that would be great. Thank you.
Yep, happy to do that. Any other board members? Saw a flash of a hand there, Austin. No, awesome. Okay, that's it. Well, so thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful evening, and I'm happy to adjourn this meeting of the LCC Board of Education. Good evening.